Good evening, Felix. Thank you for taking that time to speak to me.
It's a pleasure to be here, Ninder.
So you've got an impressive CV, but before I just read your CV out, it's very impressive. One of the reasons we're speaking is that I recently did a podcast around the future of manufacturing. And as someone who sits on the WM5G board, I know the role of technology and manufacturing. So when I came across your profile, you seem to be both. You've got a great understanding of manufacturing. You have a brilliant understanding of technology, both today and the future. So I thought, well, this sounds just the chap to speak to. So for those of you who don't know, let me, if you don't mind, just read out who you are. So Felix began his career as a management consultant, returning to academia for graduate studies and research, first in mathematical physics, then in systems engineering and computer science. A career that began with 2 research fellowships, culminated in a decade spent as a full professor of informatics. With a career spanning more than 30 years in research and development, he's addressed various problems in a number of different business sectors, which has resulted in novel solutions and won much praise and well done, including an award from the UK government for innovation. Innovation is so key. After returning to the commercial sector, which is interesting, Felix rose through the ranks to become a CTO. A few years ago, he founded Blue Manifold, a company that specializes in informatics and complexity science. Wow. During the last decade or so, Felix has served on various think tanks and has mentored a number of CTOs. Currently sits on 2 boards and serves as an advisor to C-level stakeholders. And in 2018, Felix co-authored a book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution, responding to the impact of artificial intelligence on business, with Professor Mark Skilton of the Warwick Business School. So thank you very much. This is going to be interesting. So what we're going to discuss, Felix, is the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We'll chat about what it means for skills. We'll chat about what it means for the economy. We'll chat about the positives of technology. We'll also chat about some of the negative aspects. And then we'll probably finish off with what you think the future looks like for industry, for business, particularly when it comes to technologies. Let's start with, and this word is bandied around everywhere, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Now, I'm based in the Black Country, and of course, the Black Country in Birmingham, it's known for the First Industrial Revolution. So tell me, what is the fourth? How does it differ from the first? And how does, so it's 3 sort of questions thrown in, and how does the Internet of Things fit into this fourth, first, and the Internet of Things? Over to you, Felix.
The First Industrial Revolution, and sometimes people like to call it the Agricultural Revolution, or we're really looking at a revolution where machines entered into the scenery of human culture. So we were using all kinds of machines where predominantly we would use human muscle. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is a very different kind of revolution, primarily because it's the culmination of all kinds of emerging technologies. And you mentioned one of them, which is the Internet of Things, but it also includes machine learning, artificial intelligence, and a lot of the systems biology and the biological innovations that we've seen most recently in terms of the mRNA, in terms of CRISPR and so on, which is allowing us to merge the physical, the biological, and the digital realms together. And that's never happened before. Up until now, the different industrial revolutions, including the digital or the third industrial revolution, was really automation. This one is very different because we as human beings are involved in this sort of culmination of the technologies. And you can see it in things like the brain interface, for example, where people are trying to help those who are perhaps disabled in some way with new technology that will give them the freedom they've never had before.
So the fourth industrial revolution has a human aspect to it, as opposed to the previous ones, which are around technology and machinery. And is that right? Have I got that right? So this is where the human beings get involved. So before I move on to a couple of other questions, I'm just intrigued. How did you, Felix, from a mathematician, and by the way, I'm not brilliant at maths, how did you, which is why I'm in awe, the fact you did a degree in maths and got a first class honours, if I remember well. How did you get from maths into artificial intelligence? And we'll talk about machine learning afterwards as well. Artificial. How did you make that connection? And why was that an area of fascination to you?
I'm sort of the vintage where children were being taught programming at school. So I learned to program in 1971.
Wow.
But it wasn't something that really was my passion. I mean, I'm grateful for my father, who kept on telling me my future was in computing, and I kept on telling him that my passion was in maths. And we used to have this discussion for decades. It wasn't until almost 10 years later when one of my teachers introduced me to symbolic computation. So up until then, it was all sort of numerical, doing engineering types calculations, or perhaps, accounting, that kind of thing. But in '82, he introduced me to symbolic computation, and that essentially pivoted my career.
Sorry, what does that mean? What does that
it means that the software was able to do manipulation of symbols rather than doing lots of very fast calculations. So I was introduced to some software that did tensor calculations symbolically, not numerically.
So
it was doing.
Sorry, go on.
So it was doing, mathematics as children would do in schools. They would do algebra, for example, and this would do essentially symbolic algebra as opposed to approximations that we're familiar with.
A couple of other terms which I could do with sort of some explanation is the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning. So you hear these two words, some people interchange them. So we know what the fourth industrial revolution is, the human person now being involved.
Yes.
We'll chat a little bit about Internet of Things. We know why it's different from the first. But what's the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning, and what are these two things?
Artificial intelligence is sort of the umbrella term that includes machine learning as one component. And the term artificial intelligence was introduced by John McCarthy in the sort of mid to late 1950s. The idea is much older. And in fact, it goes back to Leibniz, which is 350 plus years. But in modern day, in terms of modern day concepts, it was Alan Turing. And Alan Turing started the idea of, can we automate some of the human behavior, some of the human thought? And what he was looking at is, at the time, computers were human beings. They were doing calculations using pencil and paper. So he was looking at automating human computers, and that sort of instigated the idea of, what else can I automate? Can I automate other kinds of behavior apart from just mathematical calculations? So that's really the sort of the beginnings of modern AI. And John McCarthy said that there are four pillars. So it needs to be able to learn, because if you don't have a system that can learn, it's not very intelligent. It needs to have an element of perception, an element of reasoning, and be able to communicate. And in this day and age, communication, people have sort of translated that to mean natural language. So they're looking at natural language processing. So the real artificial intelligence has these 4 pillars, and you have to have those 4 pillars in order for a system to be considered as intelligent. What's happened now is people have got very excited with the data-driven learning systems rather than the algorithmic learning systems of the last couple of decades. And so what they've done is they've started to use the term artificial intelligence to really mean the machine learning component itself. And in order to sort of distinguish it, they now call the general artificial intelligence idea artificial general intelligence. So they've rebranded the machine learning as artificial intelligence, and then what used to be artificial intelligence is now artificial general intelligence.
So example, when I'm typing away on an email and I've just started, hi Felix, good to, and then it says to see you, and it predicts what it thinks I'm going to say, that means it's learned from my previous writings to my style and what I'm likely to be saying. Is that machine learning?
That's more machine learning, yeah.
So it's learned what I'm about to write.
Right. And it could have learned from other people as well. I mean, it may not be just
right.
You.
Okay, so now we're in 2021. The 17th, 18th century is gone. The Internet of Things is now all around us.
Yes.
We're into the 4th Industrial Revolution. Now, what are the benefits of the Internet of Things and of the 4th Industrial Revolution to business and to the world in general? If I know there's a lot there, but generally, if we could break it down into mobility, in other words, transport, perhaps, health, and certainly around industry and productivity. So where does all of this come? And then I'll pick up some of the negatives, Matt, perhaps, depending on what you say.
Okay. And obviously, this is my biased opinion of all this. I can't put my hand on my heart and say this is the general what people believe. The Internet of Things is a fascinating topic because what it's bringing into the mix is a miniaturization of computers. So instead of having computers that are the size of laptops, we now are beginning to see sophisticated machines the size of perhaps a very small matchbox. And not only do they have the capability of computers, for example, if you have a look at something like the Raspberry Pi, it has the capability of a reasonably good laptop. I mean, I have a Raspberry Pi that I use for surfing the net and responding to emails, that kind of thing. And this is a single board computer about the size of a cigarette packet, and it retails at around 30 to 50 pounds. So it's bringing computers to the masses. It's enabling us to put them into classrooms, so it has an impact on how we teach, which was a dream that Seymour Papert had many years ago. In terms of the applications to industry, it's fantastic. Particularly with the Internet of Things, it means that manufacturers of very large, complex equipment can monitor the equipment while it's running. And a lot of it, for example, the preventative maintenance, they can predict when something is likely to break and arrive and repair it before the disaster takes place. It can be applied to things like wearables, which people are doing today with things like Fitbits and smartwatches, etc. So we can start monitoring people's health and again predict if there's some kind of disastrous health event about to take place. So your doctors will be able to monitor you, and if there's any problems with your heart or anything else, they'll be able to get you into a hospital or what have you and treat you before it becomes a life-threatening situation. From a business perspective, right now we are seeing machine learning being applied everywhere. And so you're getting a good example is you go onto a website like Amazon and it says you bought this book. Other people who bought that book also bought these 4 other books. Would you be interested in buying it? And that's also true for all kinds of shoppings. People who bought this kind of garden furniture also bought this umbrella and so on. So they're doing the kind of recommended systems. There are the other fairly good application are things that are called chatbots.
Yeah.
So this, and we're all familiar with those. And I find it very useful because if it's in the middle of the night, you want to call up and find out, I've just paid my utility bill. Did it go through? Have you received it, etc.? I don't really need a human being for doing that. I just need something at the other end of the internet to check that database. So I think it brings this sort of 24/7 world again to the masses.
So I mean, again, one of the other benefits, and I'm still amazed how they do it, is the Amazon retail outlets where it scans as you walk in. There's
Yes.
millions of cameras all over the place. They picked up what you've shopped, put it in the basket, and on your way out, it takes the money out of your credit card, and the receipt is already with you. I mean, that is just extraordinary. Of course, perfect for COVID because there's no interaction with anyone. But you don't have to suddenly get a card out. You don't have to queue up. And from a productivity perspective, that's just astonishing how you go in and how you leave. And that kind of thing is just extraordinary from where, listen, I can just about remember where the only way you could buy shopping was to go into a shop, stand behind a queue, and somebody behind a counter would pick up the items for you, put them in a basket. And now we're saying nobody's needed in a shop like that. You walk in, buy your goods, and you're out. And I mean, that is just quite remarkable to be able to do that. And if that becomes the norm, my gosh, then we don't have to worry about. Well, I'm not saying you don't have to worry about COVID, but you've got things in place now to make shopping so easy.
We have the technology. This is where it becomes very interesting because that's only half the sort of the solution. The other half is the human aspect. Will humans accept this as an alternative to the shopping they've been doing pretty much all their lives? But it always fascinates me, and I'm not talking about months or years ago. I'm talking about last week, for example. I turn up, I do my shopping, I go to pay, and I watch people standing in the traditional cashiers, for 10 minutes, 15 minutes or probably 10 minutes, to do it the way they've always done it. And I think that's just, humans doing what humans do. That's what they want to do.
I can see now with electric cars coming, I can see you rolling up into, I was just going to call it a petrol station, but it won't be a petrol station anymore. I can see you rolling up. I can see you charging. And if it's the Amazon thing, it just takes it out of your credit card. A receipt has been emailed. You can be in and out of these so-called petrol stations or electric stations without ever meeting anyone, without ever saying anything to anyone. On your way home, you could pop into an Amazon, not say boo-hoo to anyone, buy your goods back in the car, and you could do all of this without meeting people at all. And it's quite an extraordinary sort of vision that you can see the world developing where everything is done without having to involve a human being. So I suppose the negative question is what does this mean for jobs? Traditionally, I can just about remember to fill up a car, you'd have to, and I know in India they still do it because I was there last year, You roll up to a petrol station, a person jumps out of the office, asks you how much petrol you want, puts the petrol in for you, and you pay them. And now we are talking about, so those kind of jobs, they've disappeared here, but now we're talking about nobody requiring people at the tills, nobody requiring people at the tills at a future electric station. So where are the jobs going to be? Felix, where are we going to see the jobs if this continues in its current vein? Where are going to be the future jobs?
I have my doubts if humans are ready to accept that kind of lifestyle. And I have my personal worries, in particular with what it's doing to us as human beings. And where I'm going with that is we have a real problem called loneliness. And the technology is causing severe loneliness in human beings. And it's an interesting phenomena because obviously there's social media. The younger generation is far better connected than we've ever been. They still have their friends that they meet face to face, and they have thousands of friends on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and so on, and yet they are suffering from loneliness. And that's an indication that yes, the technology exists, but unless we force it upon them, they may not voluntarily accept what's there.
So the reason why I asked that question is if you're running a business, say a haulage firm,
yes,
and 40% of your costs are the drivers.
Yes.
But if it's a business, you could have driverless trucks.
Yes.
Then your inclination, as Amazon has done, is to say, well, actually, we can shave the costs off by removing people. So the dilemma for business then is how far and how quickly do they go into, in some instances, robots? And you talked about bots a few minutes ago, chatbots.
Yes.
So for a business, particularly the larger ones, that investment they make up front will come back really quickly because they're removing potentially the most heaviest cost they've got. So how do you think business will, and I know you're saying society probably from a lonely perspective might say, well, we're not so sure about this, but surely business won't think like that. Business will say, let's make the investment. You advise businesses all the time around technology.
Yes.
Surely you'd be saying to somebody, invest in technology and reduce your bottom line, and let these people go and do something else.
Many years ago, we built a fingerprint recognition system, a proof of concept, and it worked.
Yeah.
We just couldn't sell it. Culture just wasn't ready for that kind of technology, and they just refused to accept it. 10 years later, 9/11 happens, and everybody wants fingerprint recognition. So unless there is a need, I mean, I can see what you're saying, will the larger organizations adopt self-driving cars? If it was available today, they might. But Tesla is testing their version 9, and it still has some issues.
Yeah.
And in fact, my co-author passed away last year in 2020. And we had a bet because he said, I've just read Ford has promised self-driving cars by Christmas 2020. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll take you to a nice dinner at a restaurant of your choice if any organization is able to deliver a self-driving car in 2020. And you can do the same if they don't. It's amazing what they've done, but it's the only way that we can make this work is to get all the humans off the roads. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think that, it's a sophisticated cruise control, if you like. It's stage 2 of a 5-stage self-driving car. I think we're quite far away from stage 5, because that really requires all kinds of intelligence, like common sense reasoning and so on, to deal with incidences, surprising incidences that happen to us all the time when we're driving. And those cars don't have the ability to do that yet.
So some people argue that, I'm going to go straight to stage 5, by the way. I'm just going to jump a few stops here. So some people are hypothesizing that they could see robots, artificial intelligence doing a lot of the jobs.
Yes.
Some people will be left doing really, really high skilled, innovative jobs that help that process to quicken even more. There'll be a proportion of society who actually just won't get a job and will be given a level of what they call universal income just to live on. And those who are employed at the top doing all the tech stuff, they'll just have lots more time for leisure. And actually what we do is we flip it. So instead of 5-2, which is 5 days of work, 2 days of leisure, might flip the other way. You have 5 days of leisure, you're going for a couple of days. And that society, because of technology, because of artificial intelligence, machine learning, whatever you want to call it, that is a future some people are hypothesizing will happen. Do you think so?
I think that's quite a grim view of what's possible in the future, and it almost takes away the creative element of human beings. And when I look at the various industrial revolutions and what happened, it offered opportunities that didn't exist before the technologies arrived. So with artificial intelligence, with the newer technologies, it brings opportunities that have never existed and we couldn't have possibly imagined. It's human beings who create these opportunities, particularly entrepreneurs. And I think that the nations that are still thinking in terms of, large corporations, they employ people and what have you, that's where I think a lot of the surprises are going to arrive, because we're going to see more and more people taking advantage of these corporations in much smaller companies. So entrepreneurs are going to have a field day in the next couple of decades. I mean, they are going to be in their element, because they can see, how they can use this technology to deliver a service that we've never had before. And so I don't actually have that kind of worrisome that we're going to have human beings, that they're not going to have jobs because the robots are going to do it. And in reality, we've been automating things for decades.
Yeah.
I'm sure you remember the times when they said, well, I remember when they said to me, there's no point in management consulting or the large accounting firms, because software is going to take over. That'll be the end of it. Well, software arrived. I mean, there's some wonderful accounting software and financial packages, but the people using it are the accountants. There are more accountants now than there've ever been. So, I'm not that this sort of worry that robots are going to be able to do all the things that humans can do. I don't see it. I mean, I've not seen one piece of equipment or what have you that I would sort of say that's intelligent.
But what about the case you cited where you go into a cafe?
Yes.
And a robot serves you coffee.
Yes.
And I mean, that's it's not new in the sense it's not yesterday. This has been happening for a few. So can you not see a high street full of similar looking shops where you walk in and there's robots serving you and you no longer need the waitresses? Or in fact, is that the opportunity for entrepreneurs to bring the personal touch, should it start to go in that direction?
Well, one of the interesting things is that, that's wonderful. Will people go there? That's what interests me. Because sometimes, people like to go into one of the coffee shops, they talk to the baristas, the person, they enjoy that human interaction. And I think that's where technologies are kind of missing the point. automating things is wonderful, you know, and that robot is essentially advanced automation. That's not intelligence.
Well, it's interesting, Felix, because my business is doing big event productions for entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And we sort of do black tie, red carpet events. And so the first challenge that was thrown at me during COVID was, well, listen, abandon the live environment, just do everything by Zoom, you know, give the awards out by Zoom, just speak to people on Zoom, job done. And my response was, well, the trouble is, at least I hope so, that people come to my events for the experience.
That's right.
To mix with people. And where the technology comes in is the mundane stuff, such as buying tickets. Perhaps if you want to book one at 3 o'clock in the morning, your
Yes.
website and e-commerce should allow that bit. Now, what I've also found interesting is leading up to the event, extraordinary, doesn't matter how good your website is, people will still ring in that human touch to check certain things, even though it's on the website. So I think there is that level of, what is it, human reassurance that there's somebody at the end of a phone. Because I tell you what's annoying, I find, and I don't know about you, Felix, is you make a call to whoever,
yes,
and they will have you running around on their telephone system with the various bots, actually for hours.
yes,
And you could spend hours, oh, now press button 3, now press button 2, then they send you press 9. So from a technical perspective, it's brilliant because there's nobody involved, no people. And you allow the technology to guide people through a menu card system. But I find it incredibly annoying. Maybe I'm old school, but that's where I think the technology falls down. Is it may appear to give you an answer, but actually it doesn't. It can have you running around systems. And the amount of sales I haven't gone on to do is because of the complexity and the lack of ease of buying a product through the new technology.
yes.
That's
And if you have a look, you know, we have Zoom and we're using it right now. I'm really happy that people have finally adopted video conferencing, which is something I worked on, you know, many years ago. But again, you know, people sort of said, why would I want to do video conferencing when I can get into a car and drive down the street and talk to him face to face? What I found very interesting is, so I attend various meetings and things like this, particularly meetups, you know, where people get together and what have you. The numbers have been dropping. It's very difficult to get meetups that, you know, to get 100 people on a meetup, which Zoom can handle, but you find that people just drop off. You know, it's notoriously difficult to keep people interested. Everybody registers, you know, you sort of see this long list, there's 1,000 people registered. And then you get on and you see that, you know, maybe 150 people turned up, and from the 150, you know, maybe 20 or 30 will drop off within the first 15 or 20 minutes. So I think and when the government sort of lifted some of the restrictions, I mean, the number of people that, you know, literally flew out their front door to go and see people and you know, have a pint or what have you was phenomenal. I mean, pubs were running out of beer, you know. And I think it's that human element, which is why I started the degree called Informatics, because it brings in that human element that I think is so critical. And technologies miss that.
So let me just finish this bit off before we move on to the next one. So there's a stat which said we expect 800 million jobs globally to be lost through automation, I think by 2030.
Yes.
I think your contention is that might be the case, but they'll be replaced by a lot more jobs as a result of that automation.
I believe it will be, yes. And I'm not even convinced we'll lose 800 million.
Okay.
If you talk to people like farmers, you know, They need people to pick fruit today, not in 20 years' time,
Well, no, you're absolutely right. We know what happened through Brexit. They lost all their... Anyway, now, picking up something else, which perhaps 20, 30 years ago, before the advent of the sort of super technology we have, a word we never heard of, or I hadn't heard of, but now is a huge threat to the world, is cybercrime.
Yes. Now
that is as a result of this technology. So I'm just going to throw a couple of examples. We've got Cambridge Analytica.
Yes.
Huge problem around elections. We've had the recent attack on the Colonial Pipeline.
Yes. Where
they wanted a ransom. Part of it was paid, part of it recovered. I spoke to quite a high senior guy in insurance, said we're going to refuse to pay out these sort of ransoms, because if we do that, they'll get more and more. And my worst example, I don't know if you've seen this, but Bruce Willis in Die Hard 4, where they hack into the infrastructure, which stops aeroplanes flying, landing. You got traffic lights being manipulated. They could open dams and all kinds of things. So how serious a problem is this cyber crime because of our trip into technology? In other words, we've adopted and are beginning to adopt even more technology. And that's what we've been chatting about.
Yes.
How much of a threat does that leave us open to the wrong people actually controlling us?
It's far more serious than the serious people can imagine. I mean, I don't know how to emphasize the severity of it. And with this obsession of digital transformation, let's put everything into a digital format.
Yeah.
My concern started when we did the biometrics, the fingerprint recognition, because essentially your fingerprint is now just a digital file. And you can be very clever about how you encrypt it and how you hide it or split it into pieces and try and do the very best you can to prevent somebody getting hold of it. There are so many scenarios that keep me awake at night. I couldn't even begin to list them. I mean, it really is very serious. And I think people need to sort of wake up and, the very least they could do is use a decent password. And I'm amazed that they have this new technology, but the mindset is still stuck in the 20th century. And I think that's a worrying thought. The one that really concerns me is let's suppose that we have all of our credentials in a digital format. And let's suppose somebody alters those credentials, each one of which is altered slightly, so it's not you. How do you prove you are who you say you are? Because your passport is digital, your birth certificate is digital, your picture is digital, everything is digital, and therefore, how do you, if all of it is changed, how do you prove who you say you are? And there are other nightmare scenarios to do with information, that is stored in health, and to do with this sort of data-driven machine learning techniques that everybody is thinking as so wonderful. There are specific cyber problems associated with those machine learning applications that are not there for other kinds of applications. So if you're running machine learning, that is a vulnerability that your system has compared to somebody who is not running machine learning.
So a couple of things. It's interesting this morning. I'm going to pick up SMEs in a second. This morning, a friend of mine who connected to me on Facebook suddenly asked to be connected again, and I saw this picture. I wasn't certain. I thought there's something funny here, but I connected. But his language to me was not the language I know him to use.
Right.
So I knew straight away what was going on. And I could see that it was probably going to be some kind of, can you help me or sort of this, but it's back to your digital example. They'd got his photograph, digitally reproduced his profile, and just reached out to me and probably many others, using his credibility. And I'm thinking exactly what you've just said. Pre-digital, that just would not have happened because you wouldn't have had access to such a great picture.
That's right.
So I suppose a number of things I'd like to ask you is, you said the basic thing was obviously make sure your password is correct. But a lot of SMEs, one, have not been educated into what you just said. So there's an education problem. And secondly, there's a perception, those who do understand it, that this is going to cost a fortune. So whilst we've been talking great things about technology and what it can do and what it can deliver and how it can make society better, but it's also one of the biggest threats. So advice for an SME then, a small business, not one of these big multinationals, very briefly, what should they be doing?
There are a number of organizations, even locally, where in the West Midlands, that are very good and are competitively priced for looking at your systems and advising you on the kinds of things you should put into place with regard to cybersecurity. They have ethical hackers that will try and hack into your system and alert you on the kind of vulnerabilities your system has, and whether those could be anything from protecting your databases to all kinds of other aspects of your system. So I think it's well worth getting in touch with one of those, what I would like to call as professional organizations. These are people that do cybersecurity for a living. I'm quite concerned that we've got to a point where in technology, people go on a boot camp, 4, 5, 12-week course, and then all of a sudden they consider themselves an expert in the field. And, in some respects, they are causing more grief than one could imagine, because you believe that you've brought this person in and they are trustworthy, etc., and they will charge you a fee, but in actual fact, they're not really aware of the aspect. So I think cybersecurity needs to be baked into the systems at the point that they are designed and built. This idea that we'll come along and we'll ring fence things and we'll bolt it on, I think that's a very dangerous attitude to take. Obviously, SMEs need to have a solution today. But as we go forward, particularly with Internet of Things, that is not acceptable anymore. I think we need to start thinking in terms of baking the security in.
I've heard of an example where somebody was able to reproduce an invoice, get the bank details of a business, and actually get paid.
Yes.
And they didn't even exist, if that makes sense. So they took someone's company, digitally reproduced the invoice, got all the bank details, and just asked for payment.
Yes.
Nobody knew any better. And they clean them. So yeah, it's a big issue.
Well, the machine learning can now generate realistic pictures of human beings that have never existed. And they can generate them all day long.
Extraordinary. Talking about education then, I think increasingly, because of things like YouTube.
Yes.
So I know in my household, if something breaks down, rather than go to the shop from where we brought it, my kids automatically go to YouTube. Yes. And resolve the problem. So I'll give you an example, printers and things, this is not working. And so people are learning to resolve problems in a different way. Kids are learning in a different way. Because the rate of change, Felix, is so rapid, there's an argument that what you learned at university in those 3 years is probably redundant a couple of years after you've got whatever that qualification is.
Yes.
And some are arguing that actually the way we're being taught is wrong, because we're being taught things that are out of date and not being taught for things that are yet to appear. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
what the future holds. So an example, say 10 years ago, Felix, nobody would have heard of a social media platform.
Yes.
Nobody would have heard of a social media agency. Nobody would have heard of Instagram, Facebook, and having experts who know how to manage all of that. So my question now is, as somebody who's a professor and has worked at universities, do we need them anymore? Do we need universities? Do we need colleges? Do we just say to people, leave school, every 6 months, you're going to do something online, which brings you up to date. A year down the line, we'll send you another course that's going to be up to date. You tick that. You do that over 10 years. That's equivalent to you getting a 3-year degree. But what you're doing is you're updating your skill set. And therefore, we are training the workforce, not only for today, but for tomorrow. And business then would gain from having up-to-date people with transferable skills. So should we do away with universities?
I don't think so. I think universities need to change because society has changed, and they have not really, if you have a look at what universities are delivering today and compare it to what they were delivering 10 years ago or 20 years ago, there's very little. They'll disagree with me, but in reality, there's very little that's changed. And during the sort of the late 90s, early 2000s, I was very much part of that culture of let's introduce videos rather than, doing a lecture. Why am I doing the same lecture, month in, month out, when I can produce a video set and the students can watch it as many times as they like. They can, it's a better system. And so we have a lot to learn in terms of what actually works, because what we need to do is to create the environment that the next generation can learn. They need an environment to learn in, and that's what we need to do in terms of education. The old sort of the sage on the stage, turn up to a lecture hall and listen to somebody for an hour or what have you, I think those days are numbered. But at the same time, I think that one of the hardest things that has happened because of COVID is children have not been able to go to school as regularly as they would have liked. And again, it's going back to that human element. I think that people go to university for the experience. It's a human, it's the network that you build. It's the friends that you have. It's the kind of experiences that you build that gives you the platform for your future career. So do I believe in training? No. And the reason I don't believe it is even with things like programming, for example, when I was hiring people to work in my team, it's really, I would then have to sit with them and explain how it works in the real world. So this idea that you take a 4-week course and all of a sudden you understand how programming works, you understand the formalism, how to manipulate the formalism, but you don't really understand how you're building a solution. And I think that also reflects in the education system. In my case, one of the things that I missed a great deal was that I did mathematics, but there was only one course in the entire program that was devoted to history. And as I've got older, I've began to appreciate, things like the historical aspects of the subject. Where did it come from? And I think that's a very natural question we ask as human beings. Why am I here? Where did I come from, etc.? And that sort of brings in a whole raft of philosophy. And we don't teach philosophy, we don't teach history because they're not useful to, in terms of what the business needs. But in reality, what we're getting in return is people, instead of getting the engineer, we're getting the technician. And that, instead of building a solution to the fact that your heating is broken, you're getting somebody who's just, duct taping it.
Yeah.
And we need the engineers. We need the people who sort of say, well, what is the problem here? Oh, you have a bird's nest in the flue. You know, that's where the problem is, not in the heating. And I think those kinds of situations, you need humans. It takes time for human beings to sort of be in the right environment, so they get with the right people and they learn, and they fires up their imagination. And that's where I think we should be going with education.
So a binary system of watch the video, don't watch the video is not going to work. You still need to put it in context. You still need to be able to understand things that robots can't teach you, that intuition, that sixth sense, that something is not quite. Is that right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And if you have a look at, you know, someone like Stephen Hawking or Roger Penrose, they became mathematicians because there was one teacher who primarily, maybe for a term or a year, it just fired up their passion for that subject. And that's what happens with really good teachers. They literally create future leaders because they fire them up, they get passionate, and they become creative. They have the right environment, they have the right knowledge, the right people. If we take that away, I don't really know. I mean, don't get me wrong, YouTube is wonderful. I watch YouTube a lot. I watch YouTube more than I watch TV, you know, because it is so informative. But I'll tell you where the problem is. You don't know which ones are reliable. There are 10 solutions to your printer. One of them will blow it up. You know, but you don't know which one.
So I suppose what you're saying there, I think it's a great answer, is yes, you can go to a university and get a certificate of authentication, or you could go and do an online course and still actually not be sure that you've learned the right thing the right way. And by the way, you've not had the opportunity to mix with people whilst you're learning that.
Right. And where is the teacher that is going to inspire you?
Yeah. So how do we get around? I think I know one guess, but how do we get around the fact that some of the education is out of date for people? So how can we get around that? Should we not encourage universities to do follow-ups? It's actually, I'll tell you the example is you buy a car or a big boiler. Every year you have to service it, don't you, to make sure it's all working.
Yes.
And I personally think there should be that kind of agreement that you get this education, I don't know, instead of 3 years, you do 2 years. But for the next 10 years, you need to service your brain and bring it up to date, just like you do with a car or with a boiler, to make sure you stay roadworthy and don't crash. Because I think my problem is that once people walk out that front door, they think that's it. And that's when the gaps
I think
develop.
those days are gone.
Yeah. And that's where the gaps develop, and that's where you have skill shortages, because it's not joined up. It's not joined up.
And there used to be a time, you know, and I'm talking about when Oxford and Cambridge first started, where you needed to have a collection of subjects and they would give you a degree. And I think that's a much nicer model. You know, you need 100 credits, almost like Green Shield stamps. You know, you take your book and they stamp it. Yes, you know, you've done enough courses. Now here's your bachelor degree. Give us the book and we'll give you a bachelor's degree. This idea that, you know, I want to study physics and I can only study physics. You know, I can't do French history or classical civilization or, you know, some kind of modal logic or something out of the philosophy department, or maybe engineering. Maybe I'm really interested in naval engineering. Why can't I take a course in naval engineering? Well, you know, well, because you're doing a physics degree. I think that siloed idea is suffering from rigor mortis. I mean, it is so dead. I don't understand why we need to get away from that and have this sort of a generic bachelor's degree that has accreditation, have a master's degree that, you know, is well thought out with a industrial project. I think people doing master's degree need to get their hands dirty.
I don't think that's where businesses will benefit. They
absolutely.
Would benefit.
Yeah, I think there has to be this. there has to be more societal interaction into our education system, because they can then sort of bring how they can help. I don't mean that they need to come and sort of say, we want somebody who can program in Python and do these machine learning packages, because I think that would be a disaster. We would essentially be converting education into training, and I think the two are quite different. But we've now got to a point where we have highly educated people in industry, and they can bring a lot of their experience into the classroom. And so I see that, kind of needing to dovetail. And it'll be good for both the education and for society,
Well, final question, because our time's almost up. You mentioned Stephen Hawking a while ago.
Yes.
He said the development of AI could spell the end of the human race.
Yes.
Bill Gates and Elon Musk agree with that. What's the likelihood that a machine produces another machine, which produces another machine, which is better than the human being, and Frankenstein becomes a reality?
There's always a possibility. I don't believe that we have the ability to build such a machine today. But I do worry quite a lot about what we can build. And if we have a look at what's possible with drones, with swarms of drones, that's really very worrying. So given the technology that we already have, we can cause severe grief. And where I think it becomes very dangerous is that human beings have a belief system, and they believe what they want to believe. They don't believe what's real. And that is a really problem that I don't know how to solve, to be honest. So will we create dangerous machines? I think we're doing it already. But it isn't the sort of AI that's going to build another AI. It's going to be super intelligent. I think we are building machine. Humanity's built dangerous machines for a long time. That's not nothing new. If you have a look at what we did during the Second World War and military machines and things, we've been doing things we don't really understand. And nuclear power stations, is another good one.
Is the problem also is centuries ago, the institution, the country, the government was able to control the way these things come in. Only in the last 10 days, we've had 2 entrepreneurs who've flown into space. We have entrepreneurs and businesses that are bigger than most countries.
Yes.
Is that an issue? The fact that the human being,
I believe so.
An individual, has the power, the money, the resources, and the capacity to make the criminals in 007 very, very likely. And if that's the case, who's to blame? Is that the education system not teaching ethics? Or is that government not being able to keep up with tech and the development tech? So it's a murky, unregulated, unlegislated minefield that the world has not yet managed to grab. Is that the problem?
That is a big problem. I completely agree. Human society has put into place safety cages for all kinds of other occupations. For example, we don't let people practice surgery without being properly trained. We don't allow them to be accountants or lawyers. All of the other professions have accreditation. They need to go through some kind of training and education and work experience. Software is the only one that doesn't. Anybody who can pick up, go on YouTube and teach yourself a piece of programming language and you're off. You can build something and release it into the wild without really understanding any of the consequences of it.
Well, Felix, this has been fascinating. The difference between AI and humans can tell the difference between right and wrong.
Yes.
And I think as long as we can tell that difference, I think the world's in a good place. We mustn't forget that technology meant that we were able to produce vaccines quicker than ever was thought possible.
Yes.
And technology has been central to that. The partnership between technology and people has meant that something that was almost leading the world to implode means we're now on our way out. I think you're absolutely right. Technology is a force for good. We can have a better place where I think technology and globalization meant more people have come out of poverty. I think more people have had employment. We're all growing and seeing the world in a different way, and our technology is central to it. So I'm pleased that technology is doing what it's doing. And I'm pleased at the moment that what makes us different as human beings is we can tell right and wrong. And as long as we keep that balance, Felix, and we've got wonderful people like you telling us what's right and wrong, I think we're in a good place. Do you agree?
I completely agree. I have sort of entrepreneurial blood running in my veins, and I think we're in a wonderful place as far as entrepreneurs go. There are so many opportunities for, particularly in the startups and small businesses. There are things that they can do today that were just not possible 10 years ago.
And I think finally, the generation that's coming, my kids and hopefully their kids, technology is part of their DNA. And I think as a result, I think technology will continue to improve. And as human beings, hopefully, will be a direct beneficiary of that. Felix, you've been brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wide-ranging conversation. And of course, for those who are watching, look out for an article in a future issue of the Business Influencer where Felix will discuss some of this in more depth. And I'm sure in the near distant future, we'll have you back and we'll chat about where technology is now.
I should look forward to it.
As opposed to where we are in July 2021. Felix, thanks very much. I'm off to go and have a cup of tea and a nice roll. It's still quite warm. Thanks, Felix.
Thank you, Ninder.